Good evening. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and welcome to Vampire Reviews. I have had a wonderful past couple months talking to you all about Season 2 of AMC's Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire. I can't believe it's over. Well, for you, I'm coming to you from the past, recording this video on June 22nd. Early, yes, because I am leaving on vacation this week, and we still don't have a green light for Season 3, so it could be over forever. Or, since I don't know what might happen between June 22nd and June 30th when the last episode airs, let's record a backup take. Season 3 has been greenlit! It's not over forever! We ride at dawn! Yeah. As of when I'm actually sitting here recording this, I am emotionally dealing with the fact that it very well might just be over forever. Thank you all so much for joining me on this journey of vampire lore and deep dive adaptation analysis. I've now spent 15 videos and over 182,000 words explaining to you how the TV show's alternate universe version of Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire compares to the 15-book series it's based on. But even if we never get a Season 3, this won't be the last video I give you about this series. Nope, a couple days ago, well, for me, now, speaking to you from the past, so June 20th, I recorded a wonderful discussion with Interview with the Vampire episode director Levin Atkin, talking all about his work on the 4 episodes he directed this season, including this finale episode, as well as the 2 from last season. If you're a member of my Patreon, you may have watched that video already, but for those who aren't, look out for it here on my channel soon. When I was at the New York City premiere event for the launch of Season 2 back in April, I had the wonderful opportunity of chatting for a while with showrunner Roland Jones. He told me that I should find Levin Atkin because he's a fan of my videos. Oh my God, I know, right? But the party was so overwhelming that our paths never crossed. And so instead, he was generous enough to record a video with me over Zoom to share with you on this channel. Also, I recorded iPhone video of the event when I was able to talk to some of the actors and ask them questions about their work on the show. Mostly Asad Zaman and Sam Reed. The quality of the footage isn't great, mainly because it was so loud at the party. So once I edit it all together, I'm not sure if it will be good enough to put that video up here on YouTube, but it will definitely be available to my Patreon patrons. So if that's the sort of thing you're interested in seeing, join up now for the Maven of the Eventide on Patreon before you miss it. The link is in the description of this video. The link is in the description of all my videos. Also, a link to my Discord server, which is open to everyone to join, and we can keep these conversations going even after the season is over, as well as talk about any and all vampire topics you like. It is a spooky/vampire themed Discord server. All right, this is it. Last episode. Episode 15 is titled, "And That's the End of It. There's Nothing Else." This is a line Louis says to Daniel in the book once he reaches the end of his story for their interview. He's just finished telling Daniel how depressed and empty he felt, how meaningless everything is, and how his existence is eternal suffering and torment. After Armand takes him to New Orleans to see Lestat, hoping it will make Louis come back to life with rage, and then when it doesn't work and Armand walks away from him, Louis lingers in town a little while. Then he tells Daniel, "I left New Orleans the next night because the sorrow wasn't leaving me, and I didn't want to think of that old house where Lestat was dying, or that sharp modern vampire who'd fled me, or of Armand. I wanted to be where there was nothing familiar to me, and nothing mattered. And that's the end of it. There's nothing else." The boy sat mute, staring at the vampire. Then the boy drew back and ran the fingers of his right hand loosely through his hair. "No," he said with a short intake of breath. Then he said it again louder. "No!" The vampire didn't appear to hear him. His eyes moved away from the tapes toward the window, toward the dark gray sky. "It didn't have to end like that," said the boy, leaning forward. The vampire, who continued to look at the sky, uttered a short, dry laugh. "All the things you felt in Paris," said the boy, his voice increasing in volume. "The love of Claudia, the feeling, even the feeling for Lestat. It didn't have to end. Not in despair, because that's what it is, isn't it? Despair? Stop, said the vampire abruptly, lifting his right hand. His eyes shifted almost mechanically to the boy's face. I tell you, and I have told you, that it could not have ended any other way. I don't accept it, said the boy, and he folded his arms across his chest, shaking his head emphatically. I can't. And then this is when Daniel implores Louis to make him a vampire, and Louis attacks him to drive home the point that it did have to end in despair, because there is nothing else for vampires beyond that in the end. The show changes so that instead, Daniel has this reaction less than halfway through Louis' story, long before Louis ever told him, that's the end of it. There's nothing else. So now, here in the show, when Louis finally says this line, now that we know Daniel is firmly against the idea of ever being a vampire because he's lived a full life, and he doesn't want to see the world die around him, we can expect Daniel's reaction will be rather different. AMC had kept the title of this episode secret for a long time. In fact, people only found out about it this week, for me, on June 22nd, because it got leaked. Because of the huge secrecy surrounding the title, fans assumed it would be some big reveal or a spoiler or something shocking. And when they find out that it was just another line from the book, a line from the end of the book, as this is the end of the story, let's just say there was a bit of a letdown. Right when the episode opens, we see that the skyline of Paris that's been on the top half of the cityscape Jaws, rising above Dubai every episode, has been replaced with the skyline of New Orleans again. Yes, Louis is going home. We jump right back into the story with a panning shot over the basement vaults of dead vampires under the theater. And one of the crypts we see is Nicki's, with his birth and death dates given as 1769 to 1796. That's much better than the Talamasca folder on Daniel's computer that lists his dates as 1780 to 1882. So he wasn't 16 in this scene with Lestat, but instead 27, only 9 years younger than Lestat. Much less weird. However, this does still mean that the show is making it so that Nicki and Lestat couldn't have been childhood friends who grew up in the same place after all. In the book, they knew each other as little children. They reunited again when they were 20 and started their relationship, moved to Paris together, joined the theater together, and only broke up because vampire tragedy ruined everything. In episode 3, Armand made it sound like Nicki was just some random guy already in Paris who Lestat met there after he became a vampire and they started dating.
He took a mortal lover. More heresy.
I was hoping Armand got the story wrong or was telling it wrong on purpose, but seeing these dates on the tomb now make me worry that Armand might have been right after all. Nicki and Lestat's shared past in Auvergne is so important to Lestat's character development in the book. He's going to have an entirely different backstory now if Nicki wasn't part of his pre-vampire life. But we'll have to wait until season 3 to find out what that will look like, if we get a season 3. Or alternate take. And yes, it is happening. We have so much to look forward to, seeing finally get explained. I'm also interested in why Nicki has this tomb at all. In the book, he threw himself on a bonfire and burnt to ash, and then the coven scattered those ashes. There'd be nothing left to even put in the tomb. Could it be that in this version, his body is still intact? In that case, that means he's technically not actually dead. For any vampire that still has its heart and its brain, it can and will come back to life. Will we be getting a Nicki revival in future seasons? As we pan over the crypts, we hear Louis moaning in his from the Starvation, though he tells Daniel that it was a quiet, easeful death. And then the camera shows us close-ups of the books on the floating shelves in the Dubai reading room. It looks like they're all antiques and historical classics. Tolstoy and Sartre are on there, which are the sort of books Louis is into reading in the series, but noticeably absent is Dickens, his favorite author. But then Louis can't even reach these shelves. Only Armand can by flying up there. So are all these books just Armand's? There's a lot of French, and Louis in this version never seemed to become fluent in that language. Or is it part of their BDSM dom-sub relationship that Louis gets to command Armand to go fetch him a book whenever he wants one? His way of controlling Armand and keeping himself feeling powerful in their relationship? And people thought Armand was the one controlling him.
Like I could feel my heart pumping slower every night.
Every night? In the book, Louis was only bricked up in the wall for 1 day. As soon as the sun set the night after the trial, Armand busted him out of there, and Louis ran out and saw Claudia's ashes and Lestat sobbing over her yellow dress. But this time, he stays in the coffin in the wall for multiple nights? What is going on? Where is Armand? Daniel asks him,
What were the consequences of you saving Louis?
and Armand tells us that he not only stayed with the coven, but became its lowest ranking member, doing all the worst grunt work around the theater. Yeah, in the book, Louis is only in the coffin in the wall for the day, and then destroys the theater the very next night. Armand lets it happen and doesn't warn any of the coven because all he wants is Louis to himself. He wants Louis more than anything in the world, and the theater coven is useless to him now. But this time, he really does still seem to care about the coven and want to keep it, even though he's infinitely more powerful than any of them there and could just put them all to sleep with one word like he did in the restaurant, or set them all on fire with a flick of his mind. He bends over and lets them humiliate and abuse him so that he can get off on some shame kink. We see him taking bodies to the rat box and hearing Louis screaming in the wall vault, but still, Armand doesn't do anything to spring him, which was such a nothing thing for him to do in the book, and all the vampires knew he was far too powerful to try to stop him. Yeah, the show has changed a lot about the vampire powers, and Armand is a character, but this still isn't adding up, which is okay. Armand could be lying or could have some secret motives. My questions will be answered. But why aren't Louis and Daniel ever questioning it? Is Armand, using some kind of psychic power in Dubai to keep them from thinking too hard about things? Shh, don't think too hard about it. As Louis tells Daniel about how it felt to be buried alive, he says he spent the time thinking about different things he could have done earlier in his life that would have changed his path so he never ended up in this torment. But the thought experiment never works, and he still always ends up falling for Lestat and choosing to become a vampire. Yes, Louis is the vampire. This is Interview with the vampire, and Louis is the most vampiriest vampire that ever vampired. The example of what it means to become a vampire in this universe, even though he's so much not like the other vampires. He was destined to be a vampire, to be the vampire. And all roads from any multiverse path his life could have taken lead to Lestat and him becoming a vampire.
Claudia is dead. Claudia is dead. What was left to endure for? Claudia is dead.
While Louis is enduring this torture of starving to death, Armand just sits there, doing nothing about it. He tells Daniel,
When a vampire starts screaming from starvation, he hasn't much time left.
time left to what? Time left to be alive? This is very different from how vampires work in the books. There, any of them can bury themselves and survive indefinitely, shriveling to dried out husks, but only growing stronger and stronger as time passes, then emerge one day and drink some blood and return right back to their old strength. In body, at least. Sometimes their minds and sanity are affected if too many thousands of years have passed in isolation, like Cayman and Makare in the books. But most of the time, while vampires are sleeping in the earth, their consciousnesses are psychically floating around the world, absorbing society as it grows and changes. Or if not, at least hearing it with their vampire ears. And this constant connection to the waking world keeps them sane for when they're ready to wake up again. Lestat said last episode that he slept for 100 years in the ground and didn't starve to death at all. But Armand is saying Louis doesn't have much time left after only days? Weeks? It's unclear how long he's been in there. Lestat does mention the ancient blood in his veins, so maybe the show is saying that he was able to do it because of his ancient blood in his veins, but Louis wouldn't be? In the books, any vampire at all would survive, no matter how weak they were. The only way a vampire can die is if their heart or brain are destroyed. Even if a heart and a brain are burnt to ash, if those ashes aren't scattered, they will just gloop back into a heart and a brain and start functioning again after a few hundred years. Here's how Lestat describes the experience of being buried alive when he goes into the earth as a 10-year-old baby vampire long before he gets any ancient blood in his veins, after he gets the news that Nicki is dead, and also the French Revolution happened and has slaughtered his brothers, their wives, and all of his beloved little nieces and nephews. The thirst came the thirst went. It was the rack and the fire, and my brain thirsted as my heart thirsted, and my heart grew bigger and bigger and louder, and still I wouldn't give in to the thirst. Maybe mortals above could hear my heart. I saw them now and then, spurts of flame against the darkness, but more often I saw only darkness, heard only darkness. I was finally just the thirst, lying in the earth with red sleep and red dreams, and the slow knowledge that I was now too weak to push up through the soft sandy clods, too weak, conceivably, to turn the wheel again. That's right. I couldn't rise if I wanted to. I couldn't move at all. I breathed. I went on, but not in the way that mortals breathe. My heart sounded in my ears. Yet I didn't die. I just wasted. My hands were claws, and my flesh was shrunk to the bones, and my eyes bulged from the sockets. Interesting that we can go on like this forever, that even when we don't drink, don't surrender to the luscious and fatal pleasure, we go on. Interesting, that is, if each beat of the heart wasn't such agony. And, if I could stop thinking, Nicholas de Lefant is gone. My brothers are gone.
Claudia is dead. Claudia is dead. I had no energy to scream. If I had, I would have used it to ignite the clothes on my body. Self-immolate.
Ooh, so he's suicidal now? In the book, he was not at all suicidal after Claudia died. He was enraged and vengeful, and then once he got all his rage out, he was numb. But I don't think that would work anyway, Louis. With all those rocks in there, lighting your clothes on fire wouldn't have enough oxygen to keep burning long enough to immolate you, I think. In the books, vampire blood itself is especially flammable. So when they want to kill each other with the fire gift, they don't focus on the clothes or on the skin, but on igniting the blood in the vampire's veins, cooking them from the inside out. But even if the show is keeping that lore, no one's ever taught Louis this here, so he wouldn't know that fact. Also, one of the rules of the fire gift is that a vampire must be able to see that which he or she wants to burn. In sum, no vampire can burn another if he cannot see that vampire. So I'm not sure if Louis would be able to light his clothes on fire since he can't see them with all those rocks in the way. Armand tells Daniel that he played up his patheticness over his failure to save Louis in order to lull Santiago into a false sense of security so that one day, while everyone's asleep in their coffins, he can finally free Louis from the vault.
I was the defeated vampire, Mr. Malloy. No one was looking.
Okay, but since you rigged your coffin to stay open during the day while they all slept, they also weren't looking any other previous day while they were sleeping? Why did you have to wait so long and let Louis starve and suffer? He pours some of his healing blood on the rocks to revitalize Louis. Of course he doesn't need to do this in the book because Louis's only been in there for a day and he's just fine. Also, in the books, Armand refused to ever share his blood with anyone, even Louis, until after he and Louis break up and he's begging Lestat to be his companion instead and offers Lestat his blood, which he's never offered to anyone before. This Armand seems much more cavalier about sharing his blood as he gives it to Louis again to heal his horrible injuries in 1973. But these are dire situations which Louis never faces in the books, not with Armand. So Armand never had the opportunity to need to heal him, and maybe he would have. Though I am still on the side of Louis was only fake drinking from him during that scene in season 1 to try to trick Daniel.
Claudia is dead. I was dead.
In the book, long after Armand and Louis leave Paris and are traveling the world together, Louis says, I drank in the beauty of the world as a vampire drinks. I was satisfied. I was filled to the brim. But I was dead. And I was changeless. The story ended in Paris, as I've said. For a long time, I thought that Claudia's death had been the cause of the end of things. That if I had seen Madeleine and Claudia leave Paris safely, things might have been different with me and Armand. I might have loved again and desired again and sought some semblance of mortal life which would have been rich and varied, though unnatural. But now I have come to see that was false. Even if Claudia had not died, even if I had not despised Armand for letting her die, it would have all turned out the same. Coming slowly to know his evil or being capitulated into it, it was all the same. But this time, Armand isn't there for Louis when he wakes up out of the coffin. He leaves the coffin in the sewers and just disappears, and Louis emerges from it alone. Very different from the book. I really do think Armand here had no grand scheme of trying to get Louis for himself at all. He's just winging it, a victim of the machinations of the Coven, and he's feeling so guilty for helping them with the trial to save his own skin that he assumes Louis won't even want him, so he doesn't even bother trying to be there when Louis gets out of the coffin. Maybe this punk-ass bitch coward version of Armand is also even afraid that Louis would hurt him, would immediately attack him for helping the Coven. So he runs and hides and goes back to the Coven that he just cares so much about keeping in this version, leaving Louis to run off and be free on his own. But of course, he's not going to do that. Nope. First, he needs his revenge. Louis's time being tortured with starvation affects his sanity, and we see him devolve into a period of madness where he's in a frantic state, hallucinating and gibbering and delirious. In the book, he does go through shock, but not any kind of actual psychotic break like this, because he wasn't starved. And since the show made the choice to starve and torture him, it's cool to see the results of that affect this new version of his character.
They moved from shadow to shadow towards the cemetery in Montmartre.
This is the same exact place Louis goes in the book, but instead of spending any extended period of time there like he does in the show, it's only to sleep in a grimy old coffin for the day, and then the very next night, he does everything he needs to burn the theater down by dawn.
Towards the cemetery in Montmartre.
Oh, my wife.
Why that place? It wasn't certain. Proximity to the theater?
Not right, though. No.
Maybe. My rage killed without a single measure of satisfaction.
This angel statue in the garden reminds me of something.
I couldn't bear the pain of their loss.
Oh yeah.
I longed to be released from it.
After he wakes up the next night in the countryside cemetery, he says, "In a kitchen garden I saw something. Something that had only been vague in my thoughts until I had my hands on it. Its sharp, curved blade still caked with the green weeds from the last mowing. And once I'd wiped it clean and run my finger along the sharp blade, it was as if my plan came clear to me, and I could move fast to my other errands." In the show, because he's so depleted from all that time in the wall, it takes him much longer to come up with his plan. And instead of just sleeping in a coffin in the grave, this time Louis gets a whole crypt to make into his secret evil villain lair to carry out his maniacal scheming. Because this time, instead of the whole plot coming together the moment he sees the scythe, he needs plans and diagrams. He also needs to steal gasoline from vehicles for his fire fuel. In the book, he just buys a couple barrels of kerosene and walks right into the theater with them. Yes, Louis here in the show doesn't seem stable enough to even think of just walking into a store and buying some fuel, but also consider that it was much easier for Louis to do in the book as a white man. How would the store have reacted if a black man who was disheveled from weeks in a wall came in and wanted to buy some barrels of kerosene? Also, this time, he has a hallucination corpse buddy who tells him to lose the scythe.
You're not a farmer. I would use the machete.
I mean, technically, he is a farmer. In the book, Louis was a farmer on his indigo plantations, and Santiago just told us last episode that this Louis was a failed sugar farmer. But of course, in either version, Louis would have never had to cut the grass himself. He had people for that. People. So yeah, maybe the dead farmer's right, and Louis wouldn't have experience with a scythe. Not that a vampire would need experience. They're super mimics. They can just pick up any skill. But the machete does wind up being much more practical for Louis later during his high-speed chase murder spree. Plus, he likes it. Look how happy he is.
Yeah.
During his extended time of madness plotting, days, weeks, months, Armand psychically reaches out to him on the vampire phone, begging Louis to leave Paris before the Coven finds out Armand freed him and they both get in trouble. But Louis ignores him, other than to tell him that as thanks for saving him from the death sentence, he's warning Armand not to be at the theater when he burns it down tomorrow night. In the book, he tells Armand this before he ever even runs off to the cemetery, right after Armand gets him out of the wall. You held sway over them. They feared you. You could have stopped them if you'd been willing to use that power even beyond your own self-prescribed limits. It was your sense of yourself you would not violate, your own precious conception of truth. I understand you perfectly. I see you in the reflection of myself. I understand you only too well. That passivity in me has been the core of it all, the real evil, that weakness, that refusal to compromise a fractured and stupid morality, that awful pride. For that, I let myself become the thing I am, when I knew it was wrong. For that, I let Claudia become the vampire she became, when I knew it was wrong. For that, I stood by and let her kill Lestat, when I knew that was wrong, the very thing that was her undoing. I lifted not a finger to prevent it. And Madeline, I let her come to that, when I should never have made her a creature like ourselves. I knew that was wrong. Well, I tell you, I am no longer that passive, weak creature that has spun evil from evil till the web is vast and thick, while I remain its stultified victim. It's over. I know what I must do. And I warn you, for whatever mercy you've shown me in digging me out of that grave tonight where I would have died, do not seek your cell in the Théâtre de Vampire again. Do not go near it. Daniel asks why Louis told Armand about the plan when Armand could just tell the coven and ruin it so that they'd kill Louis instead. Louis says it's a suicide mission, so that didn't matter. Then Daniel asks Armand,
They were your coven for hundreds of years. You had no feelings for any of them?
I had complicated feelings.
if this were the book, I would say Armand is lying here to make himself sound less sociopathic because he really didn't care about the coven. They were entirely disposable to him, an easy sacrifice in exchange for getting a future with Louis. But in this version, I don't think that's the same case at all. This Armand really did care about the coven for some reason. Even if he didn't like any of the people in it anymore, and he wasn't getting his sense of security from controlling it anymore, being part of it still mattered to him. Mattered so much that he chose to cling to them instead of taking a chance on love with Louis and running away together before any of this could ever even happen. Really looking forward to hearing his explanation for that.
Maybe you were hedging your bets? See who emerges from the ash heap?
I think you might be onto something there, Daniel. But then he says,
My prevailing thought was, if I'm not with him, I'm nothing.
which is it? If that's true, then why are we supposed to believe you went through with this whole trial thing in the first place? You told us last episode that you had no plan or arrangements to keep Louis alive and only managed to save him in the nick of time by the seat of your pants. When Louis begins to explain his revenge plan to Daniel, he says,
I was going to die, and I was going to take as many of them with me as I could.
a suicide mission. This was not Louis's thoughts in the book at all. He fully intended and expected to live, had arranged for a carriage and driver to be waiting for him to jump into just as the sun was rising to escape the burning theater and take him 40 miles outside of Paris by the time he awoke the next sunset. Louis now explains for us a bit of lore that's necessary to understand why he can even get away with tromping through the theater, spilling gasoline everywhere.
When a vampire commits himself to coffin, all the senses collapse into submission, and the dark boundaries of the world begin to stretch out in all directions. And in this state, in the lair where they slept, I could have been a marching band or a jet engine taking off a tarmac until Paris spun back round to the sun. The advantage was mine.
Okay. I'm not going to bother telling you again how this isn't from the book because we all know in the show they stay awake during the day and the show needs its own lore for that. But what I am going to comment on is how this extremely important for the plot bit of lore has never been mentioned once in all the 14 episodes before now. In season 1, we saw Louis, Lestat, and Claudia all still possessing their full senses after getting into their coffins. They seem to just fall asleep like regular humans. Nothing like the instant light switch comatose death sleep of the books, which sounds similar to what Louis is describing now to justify how he's getting away with this. When a vampire commits to coffin, well, we all know how Louis feels about commitment. I mean, maybe they didn't have this lore made up yet back in season 1. It happens. We can forgive that. But it couldn't have been slipped in and set up somewhere this season? Anywhere? In the past 7 episodes? The fact that it wasn't makes me wonder if it's even true at all, or some other lie Louis is telling right now. Maybe something Lestat or Armand told him that he never learned wasn't true and just never questioned for some reason. In the book, it's not quite sunrise yet when he's doing his plan, so even though Louis, particularly, usually succumbs to the death sleep earlier than most other vampires because of how weak his power level is, on this night, he fights the narcoleptic pull and stays awake longer. They can do that. But when he does it, all the vampires at the theater have their own rooms like monks' cells, and they're in their coffins shut behind doors. Louis is splashing the kerosene on the doors to their rooms. He doesn't open the doors and risk the vampires sensing him come in. The show, on the other hand, is copying the movie by having all the vampires keep their coffins in the same room with no doors separating Louis from them. So we really have to suspend our disbelief here for how he can get away with this. Okay, sure. They're committed to coffin and in a sort of death sleep. After all, even though vampires in this version can stay awake during the day just fine and often have been doing that, it has been established that the theater coven keeps a strict curfew and all of them are forced to be in their coffins to go to bed at the same time. I just love this groovy music playing while Louis is executing his plan. He notices on Santiago's dressing table mirror some writing mocking Claudia's death. Rude! You really never were her bestie at all, were you, Santiago? I am less shocked. This pisses Louis off enough that he ignites the fire with his mind, and we at once hear all the vampires in the coffin screaming, even though he just told us that once they were committed to coffin, nothing at all could wake them up until the sun rose. Louis grabs the yellow dress and Claudia's diaries to save them from burning, even though he said he fully planned to die and this is a suicide mission. We know what ended up happening to the diaries in Dubai, but I'm really curious what Louis planned to do with them if he did die at the end of this as he expected to. Leave them where humans could find them, alerting the world to the existence of vampires and causing mass chaos and vampire extermination the world over? Sounds like something he would do. Louis calmly goes about chopping up the panicked, flaming vampires with his machete and then walks out of the burning building without looking back at it because he's just that cool. Then hops on his motorcycle to go after the few who escaped.
And with no sign of Armand or Lestat, that meant 4 had escaped.
In the book, he says, I hadn't thought of Lestat at all the night I torched the theater. I'd thought of Santiago and Celeste and the others who had destroyed Claudia. But this time, Lestat is on Louis's mind, as he should always be. In the book, none of the other vampires escape the theater. They all die in the fire, but the show takes the opportunity to have more fun with this epic climax sequence, and Louis has planned for a contingency, sabotaging Celeste and Estelle's motorcycles, and we get to see them explode to death on the bridge. In the sewers, Santiago's psychic powers let him feel his girlfriend Celeste's death, and he reacts with grief. Oh, so he does have feelings beyond being a diva and megalomania. He could love, or he's just upset that he no longer has a coven to rule over. Louis psychically calls him on the vampire phone and reads his mind of his past so that he can mock and deride things he thinks Santiago should feel insecure about, like his failure as a mortal actor, pissing himself in fear during his making, his stage name, and his penis size. Tell me a man wrote this without telling me a man wrote this. Of course, Louis in the book is a gentleman. He would never throw around such crass, childish taunts, and he kills Santiago without a word, but this time he wants to have a cock contest. Though, despite how deeply personal his insults are, Santiago just lets them roll off him and returns them with crass vulgarity of his own, telling Louis all the disgusting things he did with Claudia's ashes just to further degrade her in death. When Louis tells him that he broke up with Armand for killing Claudio, Santiago's like, no, I get all the credit for that. I was the mastermind, not Armand, which gives us further reason to believe that Armand really was just the pathetic worm he describes himself being during this time. Louis tauntingly lures Santiago out into the streets, and when he finally catches up, he chops off his head in a single blow with the machete, underscored with a cool, jazzy saxophone riff. In the book, it takes him 2 blows, but it's pretty similar. Here's how it goes down while they were still inside the burning theater. I saw Santiago above, behind me, coming down the stairs, the smoke filling the stairwell around him, his eyes watering, his throat thickened with his choking, his hand out towards me as he stammered, You, damn you! You! And I froze, narrowing my eyes against the smoke, feeling the water rising in them, burning in them, but never letting go of his image for an instant. The vampire using all his power now to fly at me with such speed that he would become invisible. and as the dark thing that was his clothes rushed down, I swung the scythe and saw it strike his neck and felt the weight of his neck and saw him fall sideways, both hands reaching for the appalling wound. But I stood there poised, staring at Santiago, seeing him rise despite the wound, and I swung the scythe again, catching him easily. And there was no wound, just two hands groping for a head that was no longer there. And the head, blood coursing from the torn neck, his eyes staring wild under the flaming rafters, the dark, silky hair, matted and wet with blood, fell at my feet. I struck it hard with my boot. I sent it flying along the passage, and I ran after it. In the show, after Luke cuts off his head, Santiago's body just flops down, so we don't get the creepy hands groping for the head, but we do still get the boot kick right into the camera lens. In the book, Santiago burns up to ashes before his body has a chance to find the head and put it back on. But here, we cut back to Dubai and hear nothing more about it. And since Santiago wasn't beheaded in the fire this time, for all we know, his head could have been reconnected to his body and he could still be alive out there. Santiago revival in future seasons?
And all my rage and madness exited my body, and nothing replaced it.
Yes, this is exactly how he feels in the book. In the book, that feeling of nothing lasts for decades, a century. But in the show, he gets over it pretty fast and is back to rage and feeling the very next night. In the book, after the fire, he's wandering around Paris, feeling more alone than he's ever felt in his whole existence when he hears Armand stalking him. They talk, and Armand admits he didn't care about the coven and was fine letting them die in the fire so that he and Louis could be together. And Louis is just like, okay, that's pretty evil, but I'm evil too, so we deserve each other. So help me break into the Louvre so that I can turn to art in my time of grief, and then we can be travel buddies for the indefinite future. Here, Armand says the opposite to him.
It's my coven of 200 years. Or him. And at the time, I could not count on your love lasting as long.
That would not have deterred Book Armand. That gremlin wanted Louis, wanted him more than anything in the world, and would see to it that he had him. No wishy-washy uncertainty of, oh no, what if we don't work out? I need to keep a backup. Nope, Book Armand knows what he wants, and he stops at nothing to get it. In the book, after he makes Madeleine, Louis asks Armand, and are you satisfied? I don't mean to be harsh. You have me. I love you. But I'm mystified. You're satisfied? How could I not be? Armand asked. I'm satisfied, of course. A man of simple needs. Easy to please, that Armand. Well, here, what Armand decided he wanted wasn't Louis at all, but to keep the coven. This Armand is much more needy for validation and reassurance. He needs Louis to love him first before he can commit himself. In the book, Armand wanted Louis, wanted him more than anything in the world. Just him. As he was. He'll take it. In the show, even though Armand said those exact same words, what he really means this time is he wants Louis to feel a certain way about him. He wants Louis conditionally. He's not just head over heels for Louis and wanting him no matter what. No, he wants a love match. Louis is only worth losing the coven for under certain conditions, and those conditions were not met. Armand is not satisfied, of course. So this Louis was not worth it for him, and Armand chose the coven. But now that Louis has destroyed the whole coven, Armand has to settle for Louis after all. So he's here begging for Louis to take him back.
Then once think, and all that time, telling me, make a different plan with me.
Yeah, Armand, why not? Armand does not answer this question. Louis asks Armand if Lestat is still in Paris, a thing he never even thinks of doing in the book because Louis just assumes Lestat died in the fire, and Armand lets Louis believe this for a century. In reality, Armand had taken Lestat back to Magnus's tower as his prisoner, because that's where Armand lives, actually. Lestat gave the tower to him when he left Paris, and Armand made himself like a little home in there. And Armand tells Lestat that Louis died in the fire, and then throws Lestat off the tower out of anger for Lestat not wanting him, breaking every bone in Lestat's body, which takes him years to recover from before he's strong enough to return to New Orleans. So, if that scene has already happened here, then yes, Lestat is still in Paris, a broken wreck. But since it does seem like Armand never kept him prisoner this time, I'm guessing it didn't happen. Maybe this will get retconned in season 3 when they tell this whole book in more detail. Armand and Lestat's nonsense in Paris during the trial and after in New Orleans are the best parts of the whole series, the entire Vampire Chronicles. And AMC has the chance to show those parts on screen. This time, instead of letting Louis think Lestat is dead, Armand takes him right to him. So now Lestat also doesn't think Louis is dead, which explains why neither of them seem surprised at all for Armand to connect them via vampire phone in the 1970s.
I am your maker's voice.
Lestat is in Magnus's tower, but it still looks like a medieval ruin, so apparently Armand never made a home out of it. Maybe in this version, Lestat never even gave it to Armand. He's having a moment, sitting on the floor and muttering to himself. Has he been here doing this for months? The whole time Louis was trapped in the wall and then in his mad villain lair? If not, what has he been up to all those months? So much more time has passed in this version than the single day it all takes in the book that this is prime opportunity for some new scenes of what Lestat and Armand were doing with each other during all those months. Give it to me.
Ask for a child. The lights going out of your blue eyes, like all the summer days are gone.
The lines Lestat is muttering here is something Magnus says to him when making him a vampire. You're dying, wolf killer. The lights going out of your blue eyes as if all the summer days are gone. Ask for a child, he said, his face no longer the grinning mask, but utterly transfigured with compassion. Magnus looked almost human, almost naturally old. I shall give you the water of all waters, the wine of all wines. This is my body, this is my blood. Ask for it, wolf killer, and you will live forever. Life everlasting. But Lestat says, I will not ask. I will die without asking. And then the great despair I feared so much lay before me, the emptiness that was death, and still I said no. In pure horror, I said no. I will not bow down to it, the chaos and the horror. I said no. With a capital N. And now we get a scene with Louis and Lestat that never happened in the book. As deliciously tragic as both of them thinking the other is dead for decades, I'm not complaining. More Lestat scenes, more. Lestat says he came to the tower to think about why he does the things he does. Very introspective of you, Lestat. In the books, he says he hates it when people ask him to explain why he does things because he so rarely has any conscious thought that drives him to his impulsive actions. He just does them because he wants to see what will happen or because it feels exciting or right in the moment. But Louis is not here for explanations or introspection. When he points out the awfulness of Lestat deliberately killing his own daughter, he says,
The great laws.
What fucking law did you ever follow, Lestat?
yes, exactly. Thank you. Who is this guy and what has he done with Lestat? Lestat left Europe and moved to America to get away from the laws and live free and follow his heart. Even in Louis' version of the story, when Lestat says it's for the best that Claudia dies, it's not because of any laws. It's because her existence was cruel and nothing but suffering. But by then, when they're talking about it, it's been so long that all of Louis' anger is gone and he can actually accept this. Here, he's had no time yet to recover, and even though he just said that all his rage left him and was replaced with nothing, that rage is back now. He lights his hand on fire, ready to kill Lestat in revenge for Claudia. But Lestat tells him that's impossible, that the ancient blood in his veins would not let him burn unless he was willing, and even though he does seem exceedingly depressed here, he is not suicidal. Yet. He'll get there. It's hard to tell just how Armand is feeling about Lestat during this, but he lights his hand on fire too, at least to make Louis think he's willing to help him kill Lestat. But just like the revisit to their season 1 fight we watched last episode, the only way this fight would end would be in their death. Lestat is, apparently, truly unbeatable, even now, before he gets his epic Mary Sue blood power-up in Queen of the Damned. Speaking of which, the way he convinces Armand of this is by saying,
I have the blood of Akasha in me. He doesn't know who that is.
in the book, Armand wouldn't know who that is either. Even though Marius is the keeper of those who must be kept, he never told Armand about Akasha. for his own safety. Anyone who knows about her is in danger of being victimized by other vampires who are trying to find her so they can drink her blood and gain some cool extra vampire powers. And Marius does not want to share her. He readily tells Lestat all about her, but swears him to secrecy, saying that if he ever tells his future fledglings, aka Louis and Claudia, about her, Marius will come and kill all of them. But this Lestat is out of fucks to give, and he just tosses her name out there. I am really excited to find out just what this version of Armand does know about Akasha and how he learned it. Louis decides that since he can't unalive Lestat, he'll just crush his soul to death by making out with Armand in front of him and saying that he's going to spend the rest of his life with Armand out of sheer spite. Well, Armand's happy at least. He finally got that commitment from Louis. What do you think? Did Armand predict it would go down this way, and that's why this time he didn't let Louis think Lestat was dead and let this scene happen? Or did he just luck out? Tricksy little gremlin. Louis and Armand tell Daniel how they left Paris and went to Egypt and traveled around the world, lived in New York a while, which is all the same stuff they do in the books, except this time it seems like they actually enjoyed themselves on these travels, and Louis wasn't slowly crushing Armand's soul by his utter lack of feeling and passion. As they reminisce about this nostalgia, they're smiling at each other lovingly. Louis seems to be over his anger and bitterness toward Armand from the last couple episodes. After all, Armand only erased his memories that one time because Louis asked him to. And all the other strife between them, they've had 77 years to work out. And then Louis gives us our title drop.
And that's the end of it. There's nothing else.
This time, instead of being full of despair and Daniel reacting in shock and dismay, he's accepting and polite about it for about a minute. 'Cause he's Daniel, he's got something up his sleeve. Earlier in the episode, he was DMing with Roglan James, asking for some documents from the Talamasca, and Rashid slips them to him in his newspaper. You see, Daniel's a bright young reporter with a point of view, and he has a hunch. While he's looking at the documents, Armand tells Louis,
He loved you. I can say that now. He loved you a great deal. It must have been terrible for him to see us off that night.
yeah, you can say that now after you've gotten through this interview, and Louis is smiling at you, so you don't have to be afraid that talking for days about Lestat is any threat to your relationship. How nice of you to throw Louis that bone, Armand. Daniel leads into the bomb he's about to drop by asking about inconsistencies in Louis' story. One of them is the same question I asked way back at the beginning of season 1, right after Lestat makes Louis a vampire and talks to him telepathically when makers can't do that with their fledglings.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe he whispered it to me.
Wow, Louis really calmed down about getting every detail exactly right, like was so important to him in episode 8. He even almost seems annoyed by Daniel's effort to be correct here.
I just got it wrong.
But yes, more of this. What else? What else, Daniel? We've got 14 episodes to go back over that I had tons of questions about that you still haven't answered, and all kinds of details to correct. But no, that is the only one we get. Everything else Daniel brings up is about the trial and the theater fire. Really? Not even like a rule of threes for the past incorrect details? We learned that the vampire Sam was the 4th one who escaped the fire, and he's still alive to this day.
I believe he's a DJ now.
A DJ?
He wears a decorative helmet on his head when he performs.
Huh, so no more writing plays? Well, I, for one, am very much looking forward to the return of the vampire Sam in future seasons and in the new show, the Talamasca show. So glad he got to live then. Daniel asks how many soldiers Lestat telepathically controlled to leave the house when Louis ordered him to do it that one time. And I'm like, okay, here we go. Next question is going to be, why didn't Lestat do the exact same thing when the cops came to their house in episode 5, which could have prevented all the drama and horror that happened afterward? But no, Daniel doesn't even mention that. He only brings up the soldiers as an example of Lestat's extreme psychic power, because he has a hunch. He thinks that Lestat loved Louis enough that he could have been using his psychic power to help Armand control the audience to get them to say banishment instead of death. But Armand shoots that down right away, tries to get this awkwardness to end by asking them to move into the dining room for dinner and says,
We have something special prepared for you, Daniel.
well, that's not ominous at all, Louis. But we never get to find out what the surprise is because Daniel powers through and reveals that the Talamasca sent him a copy of the trial script that has Armand's directorial notes in the margins. Yes, Armand directed the play and then only pretended to be a prisoner forced to watch because...
You were supposed to die with Claudia!
Wait, what? So Armand really fully intended for Louis to die? He chose the coven over him completely and was ready to kill Louis off right there? What? Then why even bother with pretending to be a prisoner forced to watch in the audience? If Louis was going to be dead by the end, why was that necessary? Well, considering it was Lestat alone who actually saved Louis from the death sentence, it was a good thing Armand did do that because then he could take the credit for it, which Lestat let him do for some reason. Probably because he'd finally accepted that Louis doesn't love him and he's not going to try to force him to anymore. He knows he has no choice but to let him go. But when Louis and Armand went off together, Lestat said,
Let's see how long it holds.
An odd phrase. What do you think he meant by that, Louis?
He's saying, let's see how long Armand can keep up the lie that he was the one who saved Louis. Unlike in the book, where Louis understands Armand's part in Claudia's death from pretty much the beginning, but decides to stay with him anyway because it's the only way he feels he can survive. This time, Louis is shocked by this revelation and immediately turns on Armand, all of his love for him disappearing in an instant, replaced with hate and rejection. A flashback to Armand directing the play reveals that Lestat seems to be there much more reluctantly. Actor Sam Reed revealed in an interview with Screen Rant after episode 7 aired that when Lestat received the psychic summons from the coven while they were hanging off the Eiffel Tower, telling him that they were doing the trial, he didn't want to come and help them, but he couldn't just stay away and let them kill Louis, so he had to come and take part of it if he had any hope of saving Louis at all. No mental manipulation or torture needed to get him to participate in the trial this time. But how did they get Lestat to play along with so much of it instead of him fighting against the theater vampire's trickery from the beginning like he does even in Louis' version of the book? We never find out.
Where does the bullshit start? Armand, Amadeo, Arun?
Yes! I love that Daniel is specifically referencing Armand's tragic backstory that he told Louis in episode 4 in the Louvre. I knew Armand was lying about Marius whoring him out to his friends in exchange for paintings. Marius would never do that. Thank you. Validation.
He didn't save you. Lestat did.
Daniel ships it. He also tells us that Vampire Sam was a telemascus all along. He smuggled Armand's director's copy of the script out of the theater for them before it could burn. What remarkable foresight. Neither Louis or Armand question what the telemasca is, though in the books, at this point in the story, neither of them would have ever even heard about it. They don't find out it exists until a telemasca agent becomes a vampire in Queen of the Damned. But that's because this point in the books takes place in the 70s, right? Before the internet and all the other ways Louis and Armand could find out things about the world. So now that we're in the 2020s, there are many ways that they might already know about the ancient order of psychic detectives. Louis storms out of the reading room and Armand stares at Daniel, and I'm really surprised he doesn't just explode him right there on the spot. Instead, he runs after Louis to try to win him back with whatever bullshit left he can try to spin, claiming Santiago forged the handwriting on the script. But Louis just violently slams Armand into the wall, enough to shatter the glass bookshelves on the other side. Don't worry, Daniel's fine. His martini glass didn't even fall over. But Armand's not. Damn! How did Louis have the strength to do that to Armand, the 500-year-old vampire? Is it like those times when Louis fought with Lestat and Lestat refrained and let Louis just beat on him because he didn't want to squash Louis like a bug with his immense strength? Louis dumps Armand on the spot and tells him to move out of the house immediately. Then he leaves to cool off, only warning him that if he so much as touches Daniel, he'll kill Armand. And as we've seen, this Armand will do anything to save his own skin, so Daniel should be safe. Louis is grateful to Daniel, promises to pay him his whore number of $10 million, but then sets his computer on fire. So I guess he doesn't want the interview to become a book after all? What about the great conversion? But this is a completely pointless move because we already know that Daniel backs up everything to the cloud. This respect and appreciation he's showing Daniel here has me really wondering about why Raglan James said,
You fear Armand. You should fear the other one.
way off base with that one there, James. Next, we see Louis coming home to New Orleans in a cab driving across the Twin-Span Bridge, which Lestat in the book has a particular fondness for. He calls them the Dixie Gates. To me, these bridges will always be the Dixie Gates, and I never wait too long after returning home before I go and walk near them and admire them with all their thousands of tiny twinkling lights. Understand, they are not aesthetic creations such as the Brooklyn Bridge, but they are bridges nevertheless, and all bridges are beautiful and thought-provoking. And when they are fully illuminated, as these bridges are, their ribs and girders take on a grand mystique. Bridges are a great metaphor for crossing emotional divides, for leaving one thing behind to take on something new. Armand and his grief and his despair and his boredom is on one side of Louis' inner bridge, and on the other side is Lestat? And we can see that Louis is just full of feeling with his homecoming, even though a huge hurricane is about to hit the city. This is not meant to be a real hurricane that happened. We don't know how much time passes before Louis makes this trip, but no storms made landfall in Louisiana in 2022, and it was never in the hurricane cone in 2023. The scene could be set sometime in the future, but either way, this is an entirely made-up-for-the-show hurricane, and it is not sensationalizing anyone's actual real-life tragedy. Cute story. When Anne Rice's son, Christopher Rice, was drafting his first novel, A Density of Souls, which is great, by the way, and super gay, you all should read it. The book features a huge hurricane at the climactic moment, and he let his dad, Stan Rice, read a draft. And his dad, a professional poet, thought it was amazing, compared it to Russian literature, for the most part. Christopher says, but Dad hated what he called the over-the-top stuff, and he made no secret of it. The cataclysmic hurricane, the showdown inside the bell tower, he wanted them gone. And when he told my mother this, she responded, those are bestseller scenes, Stan. And the show is taking Anne Rice's advice here, and it adds in a cataclysmic hurricane to this scene that in the book only takes place on a peaceful spring night. In the book, Louis makes this trip to New Orleans before the interview, before he breaks up with Armand. Armand has been begging Louis to take him to New Orleans for years, but Louis always resists, until Armand reveals that Lestat's not dead after all and living there. Finally, Louis goes to see Lestat, and the scenes that follow in the show are taken straight out of that trip in the book. Just minus Armand and being after the interview instead, and plus a hurricane. Those are bestseller scenes, Stan, like Claudia called it.
The stormy romance of you two!
And Armand said,
You cannot script a hurricane.
the storm is their love. Even though the Lestat reunion scene in the book ends with Lestat begging Louis to stay with him, and Louis refusing, and then Lestat goes into the ground for a 50-year dirt nap, the show has changed it so that this scene takes place in present day. And it is giving me hope that it's going to turn out differently this time. The show ships it. I should tell you, though, that in his version of the story, Lestat says this scene never actually happened. Louis made it all up entirely out of nothing. He says Louis did come down to New Orleans, but he only peeked in the window and saw Lestat in the house. Lestat never even knew he was there until Armand tells him about it sometime later, which is how Lestat even finds out that Louis is still alive after all, and he's like, aw, that's nice. Good for him. I need a nap. When the show told us way back at the beginning that it was going to be using all the books to give us a more correct version of the story than the movie did, with only being based on one book, I thought for sure this scene, which Lestat tells us was all a lie, is the one that the show wouldn't include, as informed by the other books. But considering that this scene is happening in real time, this is the real Lestat we are finally seeing for the first time ever. This isn't anyone telling anyone else a story. This time it's not a lie. And turns out the scene Louis made up entirely in the book actually happens after all. It begins with Louis tagging along with a historical walking tour, dressed up in football merchandise wear, to blend in with the locals. Louis the football fan. At Louis and Lestat's old house, the Gallier house, the tour guide tells an amusingly incorrect version of the story of what happened on the night Louis killed Lestat in 1940. Yes, memory is a monster, even for historical walking tour guides. Stories will always get filtered and twisted up through the people telling them.
The man that owned this townhome and that year's King Garage, he went by the name Sebastian. Melmoth.
Sebastian Melmoth is the pseudonym Oscar Wilde used after he got out of prison for his crimes of gross indecency, aka being just too gay. And Lestat says and tell the body thief that it's one of his favorite aliases to use for his credit cards and fake IDs. Wilde took the name Melmoth from the title character in the Gothic novel written by his own great-uncle. Melmoth the Wanderer is a tale of horror about a man doomed to eternal youth whose purpose in existence is to tempt people into damnation. You can see how Lestat can relate. And Wilde took the first name from Saint Sebastian, the patron saint of the gays, who is also a central symbolic figure in Anne Rice's book Violin. She really loved the guy. Violin is her most autobiographical novel. Seriously, if you want to understand the workings of Anne Rice's mind, and Lestat's mind by extension, Violin is a must-read. Louis spots a grungy-looking vampire catching rats and follows him. In the book, he's been following this guy for days, and then one night sees the vampire kill a woman and then kidnap her baby. He's convinced that if Lestat's still in town, this vampire must know him. He stalks the guy who does lead him to Lestat, and other than the baby being replaced by a bag full of rats, it's not clear if it still takes Louis nights of stalking for him to find Lestat here. When he gets to Lestat's house, Louis is wearing completely different clothes, so it might be another night. But the vampire is wearing the same thing and carrying the same bag of rats, which vampires can go for years sometimes without changing their clothes, so sure. But the main thing is the hurricane is only just starting. So that means it actually has to be the same night. Louis just went back to his hotel and put on a spiffy suit first. He wants to look good for Lestat. This house is much smaller than the one Lestat's languishing in the book. There, it was this giant mansion in the Garden District, neglected and in disrepair because Lestat's in too bad a shape to care for it, but still, it was once super fancy. He spent so many years there, lying on the floor, reading books by moonlight, that the walls of the rooms are lined with huge stacks of decaying paperbacks. Here, it's a crumbling shack in the French Quarter, no stacks of books in sight, and we see the vampire bring in the rats for Lestat's dinner since he's too weak and out of it to hunt for himself anymore. In the book, when the vampire shows up with the baby, Lestat's like, seriously? Why did you bring me this? I don't want to eat a baby. Louis does see blood-drained animal corpses all over the floor. Don't worry, no one eats the baby. After Louis leaves, he just takes it back to the house and puts it in the crib, right next to its dead mother, where he might just end up starving to death. Louis doesn't eat babies, but he never claimed to be a hero. In the book, Louis assumes this vampire is Lestat's latest fledgling, but as we find out in later books, Lestat never made any fledglings after Antoine until the 1990s. He's not the kind of person who would make a random person he didn't care about into a vampire just because he needs help. So if we're going to say this whole scene that Louis makes up is not a lie and it did happen, it would have to be that this guy is just some random vampire who came to town and teamed up with Lestat for, safety. Or he never existed at all, like Lestat tells us. But in the show, he very much does exist because this is all real, not a story. And it's really implied that he is Lestat's fledgling, which, yikes, that changes things a lot.
Who's you?
Hello.
Who's he?
Louis. No. I came to see you.
That's Louis? He's Louis?
Oh yeah, Lestat's been talking this guy's ear off about Louis nonstop. Lestat ships it. Though, much like with Antoinette, Lestat doesn't seem to like him very much at all. Why did he even pick such a douchebag to give the gift to?
He is an excellent rat catcher.
Ha! This is a reference to in Lestat's version of the story. He catches the rats for himself, and while Armand's haunting him after he's broken up with Louis, he mocks Lestat for not hunting humans, calling him rat catcher, derogatory. Well, I don't know, maybe despite his douchiness, this guy's like a musician with talent Lestat admires, because instead of being surrounded by books, this decrepit Lestat is focused on music. It's just as unhinged as the towering stacks of moldy paperbacks as he's practicing his piano fingering along to a song playing on his iPad using a creepy board that he's drawn piano keys on. Lestat's frantic excitement over Louis' visit in the books is toned all the way down to this cool nonchalance, because God forbid men ever get giddy and excited over anything. And even though Lestat still seems pretty far gone into despair, he's not the whining, pathetic lump that Louis says he is in the book. Also, his bathrobe is changed from the shabby blue terry cloth one in the book to the fancy silk black and gold one he had in season 1. Yeah, one perk to Louis not setting him on fire and burning up their house means that Lestat got to keep all his cool clothes. He's a much cooler cucumber in this version, never even asks if Louis come back to him, if Louis will stay, much less sobbing and begging and pleading for it like Louis says he did in the book. This Lestat has already accepted that Louis is done with him. He has let Louis go. He learned his hard lesson about trying to force a companion to stay with him, and he won't ever do that again. And even when Louis tells him he broke up with Armand, Lestat just says,
Good for you.
But despite how calm and collected he seems, Lestat still doesn't come off as quite fully sane. He says the reason he's practicing his piano fingering is because
Marguerite, she seems to have retired.
So he's going to take over her great work and go on tour. Louis doesn't question it at all or even seem surprised or confused by Lestat's crazy talk. When Louis asks Lestat why he didn't say he was the one who saved him at the trial, why he let him believe it was Armand, he says,
I don't like to point out my virtues.
You may scoff, but this is actually pretty accurate. People have this idea of Lestat as this vain, self-aggrandizing braggart, but that's just because he writes about himself in his books. He's just narrating what happened. If it comes off as amazing, that's because it was. He doesn't brag about things at all. He's actually pretty self-deprecating most of the time in his writing, especially when it comes to his virtues, because he knows anything good he ever does is meaningless in the face of all of his evil, like he said at the trial.
Wolf congratulated for not killing your pop.
Unlike Lestat in the book, who had some plan to try to save Claudia, this Lestat very much did let Armand and the Coven kill Claudia. So him being like, but at least I save you, that has to count for something, right? Wouldn't have made him any less wrong for doing that. Oh, how kind and generous of you, Lestat, to not kill Louis, as if he ever would have been in the position to die without you in the first place. And this Lestat knows and understands all this. He really is a changed man. He's had his Icarus fall. He's been thoroughly humbled, and he's had decades to process his trauma, and he's let go of hope for anything he doesn't deserve. Louis then does something that he absolutely does not do in the book. He thanks Lestat for making him a vampire. He sees it as a gift now, not a curse. In the book, after the scene with Lestat, he was feeling it was even more of a curse than ever. He ends the scene with despair, and that's the end of it. There is nothing else. But what Louis is saying here is similar to what he says after his suicide attempt many years later in Merrick. Lestat's blood doesn't just bring him back to life, but it also makes him much more powerful, giving him the Mary Sue blood power-up, and now Louis is no longer the weakest vampire in the world, but instead one of the strongest. He says to Lestat, "My heartfelt thanks go to all of you that brought me back. All my long life among the undead, I searched for something which I had come to believe I would never possess. Over a century ago, I went to the old world in search of this. And after a decade, I found myself in Paris, searching for this thing. What I searched for was a place somewhere in which I would be a part of something greater than myself. It was to be other than a perfect outcast. It was to be with those who would enclose me in a group to which I truly belonged. But nowhere did I find this. Until now, I am almost as strong as you are now, my blessed maker. For better or for worse, I feel that I am one of you all. Thoughts, I hear them. Music from far away, I hear it. Those who come and go in the streets outside, I hear them. I catch their scent, and it's sweet and welcoming. I look out at the night, and I see far." Louis now has full vampire powers, and he embraces them, because those he loves have them too, and they're who he belongs with. Here in the show, Louis already had his suicide attempt way back in 1973. So now he's come much earlier to his post-suicide revelation of appreciating his vampire nature and feeling like he fully belongs to a vampire community. Lestat then asks Louis about his suicide attempt in 1973, and oh no, he really thought Louis was dead this whole time. The thought of Louis hurting himself is finally what makes this Lestat break down. When Louis tells him he did it because he was thinking about Claudia, Lestat knows exactly how he feels. He's been thinking about Claudia constantly too, and they bond over their shared grief as parents. In the book, they do talk about Claudia during this scene, but much more casually. Lestat says, I didn't mean to let them do it, Louis. I mean, that Santiago, that one, he didn't tell me what they planned to do. That's all past, Lestat, I said. Yes, he nodded vigorously. Past, she should never. Why, Louis, you know. And he was shaking his head, his voice seeming to gain in strength, to gain a little resonance with his effort. She should never have been one of us, Louis. And he rapped his sunken chest with his fists and said, us, again softly. She. It seemed then that she had never existed, that she had been some illogical, fantastical dream that was too precious and too personal for me to ever confide, and too long gone. I looked at him. I stared at him, and I tried to think. Yes, the three of us together. As Lestat breaks down into tears, Louis hugs him, and they share a long, loving embrace. And as this didn't happen in the book at all, Louis just says goodbye and takes the baby and leaves. This really gives my romantic heart hope that they'll get back together now. I ship it. When Lestat asked Louis if he was just passing through, Louis said no. I came to see you. Not, yes, I came to see you and then I'm leaving again. He said, no. It's got to mean something. They hold each other and talk intently, but we can't hear anything they say as the hurricane, the stormy romance of you two, becomes so fierce that it breaks through the windows, shattering the barrier between them, and the last we see is another clinging embrace. Then we cut to at least a year later, probably more. My guess is we're in 2024 now to catch the 2022 set show up to our current time. And yes, Louis setting Daniel's computer on fire did absolutely nothing to stop him from publishing his book. We see Daniel doing a promotional TV spot for it, but despite the host not taking him or vampires seriously, we learn he's sold 5 million copies in 4 months. Whoa. It took Anne Rice nearly 30 years to sell that many copies of this one book. But because this Daniel grew up into such a famous journalist, he's got a celebrity edge up over a first-time novelist in the 70s. Daniel in the book never did any promotion for his book. He didn't even realize when it came out because he was too busy running around the world to escape Armand. Unlike all the gray flannel grandpa sweaters Daniel was wearing in Dubai, he looks cool now. Dressed up in a leather jacket and black jeans and an AC/DC t-shirt and sunglasses inside at night. Seems like making this book has changed a lot about him, rejuvenated him. We cut to Louis in Dubai. He's back at his penthouse. Oh. I was hoping he'd stay in New Orleans with Lestat since he said he wasn't just passing through. He's listening to the vampires around the world being angry at him for the book and plotting revenge for breaking Law 3 and spreading out their secrets. But he's interrupted on the vampire phone by psychically picking up Daniel's voice all the way around the world. Wow, Louis is super powerful now.
Why not send them to your editors at the Talamasco?
The shit they made me take out. No editor's next book, I promise.
Ha! This is a reference to how, after Anne Rice's 3rd Vampire Chronicle came out, her 10th book overall, she famously announced that she would no longer be using editors. She felt like her writing was like poetry. Every syllable, every punctuation mark mattered to her. The rhythm of each sentence, and editors kept ruining that. Of course, she still had proofreaders and stuff, but no one else changing the content of her writing anymore. Daniel wants to make another book, but Louis is against it. He changed his mind about the first book, didn't want it to come out at all, and refuses to accept the royalty checks from it. Not that he needs them. In the book, Daniel never shared his royalty checks with Louis. He never even saw or heard from Louis again until many years later. He keeps all the money for himself to support his life on the run from Armand's cat and mouse chase around the world, or send some of it home to his estranged family. As Daniel puts his phone away, as he was only using it as a prop to keep people on the street from thinking he was talking to himself, he takes off his sunglasses and his eyes change color right before us from their usual blue to vampire yellow. Daniel is a vampire! Yes, if you were paying close attention during the TV spot, you would have noticed that he's got the fingernails too. why does this trick of making his eyes able to change color like that? Do any of the other vampires have this power? Armand had to wear contacts in season 1. Does it only work if it's behind sunglasses? Is that why he still needed them, even though they were pale enough to see his eyes were still clearly blue on the other side? In the book, Daniel also has blue eyes, nearly violet, so when he becomes a vampire, they just become a much more intense blue. And most fans actually like to imagine they're fully purple, so yeah, I'm bummed that the show went with yellow of all colors for him. Justice for Daniel's violet eyes. We learn that, just like in the book, Armand is his maker. But instead of making Daniel out of love because he couldn't bear to see him die, in the book it was alcoholism, in the show it could have been his Parkinson's, the only reason Armand did it this time was out of spite for Daniel ruining his relationship with Louis. In the book, Daniel is desperate to be a vampire, and Armand does it out of love. This Daniel didn't want to be a vampire, so Armand does it as a curse. Making him a vampire is a very specious loophole to Louis' threat that if Armand hurt Daniel, he'd kill him. And it all happened off screen. We were robbed! We don't know if Daniel and Armand spent any time together after his making, but they're estranged now, and Armand is unreachable, and Daniel thinks,
Fucking asshole.
this is kind of like what happens in the book. Even though Armand makes Daniel out of love, he knows all fledglings end up hating their makers, at least for a while. And it's true. Daniel does reject Armand and go off to live his own life. So here, either they spent some time together and then split up at some point over the last year or so, or Armand disappeared immediately after making Daniel, leaving him an abandoned orphaned vampire for Louis to come home to, and Armand has never been heard from since. Punk-ass coward is probably hiding somewhere, shaking in his little gremlin boots that he's going to get killed. Didn't even turn to Lestat like he does in the books. We were robbed! Daniel really wants to do another book, but Louis is not interested. But this gives us a perfect setup for season 3. Since Daniel can't get the book out of Louis, he can now go interview Lestat, and instead of Lestat just writing his own book, we'll get his whole story that way. The show is called Interview with the Vampire, after all. The interviewer has to keep interviewing. As Louis moves through his Dubai house, we see he's got a new couch and replaced the bacon triptych on his wall with a painting of a parent embracing a child in honor of Claudia. I kept expecting him to, turn around the corner and the camera reveals that Lestat's there with him, but nope. As far as we can tell, after their especially huggy reunion, Louis left Lestat behind in New Orleans and he just went back home to Dubai. He's not jumping straight from Armand's arms into Lestat's. Louis is a strong, independent vampire who don't need no man. He's even removed the magnolia tree from his meditation rocks. Magnolia being the state flower of Louisiana. He has cut off attachment not only to New Orleans, but also to needing to be near nature, life, and instead surrounds himself with memories of the dead. A portrait of his brother Paul and Claudia's yellow dress. Now, you may think this seems really depressing and bad for him, but no. He's feeling strong and confident, and he psychically talks to all the vampires who want to kill him, calling their bluff for the fact that they know where he lives, and it would be so easy to get to him, yet none of them have tried to do it. His book wasn't another suicide attempt after all. No, this Louis is empowered.
I own the night.
Like Batman. The end. So, are we satisfied? No. We want more! So many unanswered questions left, and the wait for season 3 is going to be excruciating. If we even get a season 3, or alternate take. And we are getting a season 3. Better having to wait than never. I get why the show had Louis be alone at the end. It's much more meaningful for his emotional journey for the focus to solely be on him and where he's come by himself with no one else there. And like Armand says in his book, in time, Louis did learn to be alone and stayed alone for decades after they broke up before ever thinking about going back to Lestat. But I'm also thinking, it could have all just been for dramatic storytelling effect and cohesiveness. Lestat could be right around the corner in the next room, and Louis will get up off of his rock and be like, okay, honey, time to go to bed. And they've been living happily and passionately ever since the hurricane. Yeah, it could be. It could definitely be that. We don't know. And that's why Louis's not bored and suicidal anymore like he was back in the beginning.
The vampire is bored.
Louis's got his groove back. He owns the night. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and I own the Eventide. As usual, I could have talked about this episode for hours, but I have to be choosy with what I include in my videos. So if there's anything I didn't touch on that you have questions about or want to share thoughts about, please ask these questions in the comments so that we can discuss. Comments are great for the algorithm. Also, reminding you to check back here soon for my video interview with director Levin Atkin and join my Patreon if you want to see my footage from the premiere event once I'm able to get that all edited together. A special thank you to all the non-Anne Rice vampire fans who watch me that have been patiently waiting through my extreme hyperfixation on this one single franchise for me to get back to doing some other vampire content. I have a queue of Patreon requests lined up that have been waiting for a while to get fulfilled. Movies and book reviews that I'll be putting out over the coming months. Though, to warn you, one of those Patreon requests is for a long overdue book review of Tale of the Body Thief. So, we will be getting back to Anne Rice sooner than you might think. Oh no, how terrible.